Tanya, thank you so much for joining us here on the Science of Psychotherapy podcast. It's so great to meet you.
Thank you so much, Matthew and Richard. I'm really excited to be here and to see what unfolds.
Yeah, it was really exciting. We were looking at stuff lands on our desk, and not all the time, but you're certainly one we went, oh, that's interesting. Everybody knows our curiosity here at the Science of Psychotherapy is a real guide as to a good step forward. And we just want to thank you for giving your time and your sharing what you do. But we've given a little introduction. Maybe we should just start with a bit of your story, a bit of, what brought you from, mild-mannered reporter into where you are now with the work you're doing.
Yeah. So I started out my career in my mid-20s as a graphic designer. And during that time was very much longing for a long-term love relationship and thought that I would always want to get married and have children one day. But I was really struggling and didn't know how I was going to get from where I was to this long-term love relationship because it was not happening for me. And originally, I was not open to the idea of therapy. Mostly, I felt a lot of stigma, and also I dismissed what I thought my issues were, deciding that they were not somehow important enough or legitimate enough to pursue therapy for. So originally, I didn't. But as my struggle continued and my longing intensified, I decided to give it a try. I got some names. And I got connected to a wonderful therapist named Bonnie. And that experience started pretty quickly to feel healing. I felt emotionally safe in that space to start sharing my story with her. I did not feel judged at all by her. And pretty early on, she suggested that I add group therapy to the mix. And I saw her individually, of course, but she would also run the group. And the thought of it really did kind of terrify me because I was being quite vulnerable with her in a way I hadn't really been with other people. And the thought of being vulnerable like that with strangers felt very scary. But I was intrigued. She thought it would be helpful. And so I decided to give it a shot. And I think it really was in the combination of doing the group and individual that was so powerful and transformative for me that it led to me changing my career to, I got my license, I became a licensed clinical social worker and have done personal development coaching as well. And also, what I didn't say is early on, I had met this man who later became my husband, and he and I celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary last September and have 2 grown daughters. So, yeah, so that, what I had gone in to do the work towards in my life, what I wanted to change and understand better, it happened. But the part that I hadn't anticipated was how important my transformation in my relationship with myself was, and that's what really prompted me to change my career.
Yeah, it's such an important aspect of it's our relationship with ourselves. It's our awareness of ourselves. We've talked about this quite often in our podcast, so I don't want to bore our listeners. But my early years, I was in the acting profession. So I got to play a lot of people, doing a lot of things, having a lot of relationships. And one of the interesting positive things for me and for the sort of quite a few actors is the more you delve in this manipulation and playing around with who you could be or might be or can be, whatever, it helps you make decisions about who you want to be and who you feel really comfortable with. So, I'd finish playing a Hamlet and then I'd say, well, I've got to go home now. Just a minute, who's Richard again? And on the positive side of it, and I'm hoping that was what was happening there, that I found this sense of a me that I really liked. I
Mhm.
like to be. And this is what I hear in a bit of that expression there. It was really hard to find, you were finding it uncomfortable to be the you that you thought you were, or who the impression you got. What do you think made the change, the difference, the shift from being something you that you were uncomfortable with and a you that you were comfortable with? Is it a little thing, a quick thing, a
Mhm.
slow thing? I don't know. What was your experience?
I think probably the thing that got in the way the most for me was this limiting belief. So I went into that situation not knowing what was in the way for me, but trying to answer that question for myself before I got into the therapy situation. Why might this be happening? And what I came up with is that there was probably a part of me that wasn't very lovable. And so that was a belief that I held on to, thinking, if I'm not lovable, I better curate the version of myself that I want to. In this case, I was longing for a love relationship. So it was mostly what I wanted to show up for with men that I might be interested in, but it could be with anybody, where I would curate what I was showing, try to think through in my thinking mind before saying things, deciding what sounded cool, what sounded funny, what made me sound smart, like all the things that I thought I wanted to show to the world. But what that did, of course, was take up so much energy, and it interfered with my ability to be present and embodied and really connected in a very genuine way. And so I think it was starting to release some of that idea, that limiting belief that I wasn't lovable. Part of that was being in a group with other human beings who I really started to get to know and admire. I saw them as being such wonderful people. And I heard from them that they had some similar insecurities of their own. And being able to see that in other people helped kind of create a little bit of a crack in my own story. And then with some time, I was able to really let that go.
It's interesting, that thing of what is the real you, but also I'm just thinking of the reverse thing, our desire to meet somebody, and so we misrepresent. I was doing Romeo and Juliet, and the girl who was in it I thought was fabulous, gorgeous, and things. So I made a bit of a thing, whatever you do, bit of a pass, and she said, "Hey, Richard, I'm not Juliet." You know,
Mm,
don't romanticize me. So we get those two things going on. Your thing of being unromanticizable, and
mhm,
others of
mhm,
being and then of course you try to make yourself romanticizable. It's that
mhm.
performance stuff gets messy, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, because we can't, I mean, when we're in that space, everything is sort of getting crafted along the way. And so without being able to check in with our hearts and what is our intuition really saying, if we're too much in our heads, we're not able to access that.
Can I ask the attempt to be more lovable? So, the putting on the act, was there a sense of being unlovable first and then you tried to, put on a persona of being lovable? Or was it putting on the persona of wanting to be lovable exacerbated you
Yeah.
felt, do you know what I mean?
I'm
The
smiling
cart and
because I
horse.
love that question. Yeah. And I'm not quite sure the answer. I mean, I think it's probably a little bit of both. I mean, I think
Okay.
this stuff kind of seesaws a little bit. So
Mm.
I think growing up, we all carry different limiting beliefs. So I probably didn't start out struggling with men and then having this brand new limiting belief that came to join sort of how I showed up in the world. I think growing up in the family that I grew up in, I had a mother who had a lot of anxiety, and it came out as anger and rage often. And so I think as a child, number one, I developed some people-pleasing tendencies because I never wanted to set my mom off, but also some of that. And we all do this, we all make up some stories to keep us safe in the childhoods that we grow up in. So I think that there's more history to that story. My mom's anger, my dad was a workaholic. And just to say that's probably what got some of my stories going and some of the limiting belief. And then feeling like, oh, I better craft this thing. And it probably intensified from some of the feedback that I got from not being able to sort of connect more fully with
Right.
potential love partners.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
but then you moved into so there was the initial therapy with Bonnie on the one-on-one, and you were able to release, and that's a wonderful a wonderful thing that can happen. And we've been doing it for generations, before psychotherapy, sort of with these special people. We'd all end up at Auntie Mary's place for a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or something. But then sort of that great person you can trust, but then moving into the group, that becomes, we all know that co-regulation is a really important aspect of human existence. But I just, as you were talking, I just jotted down, there's this perception of the danger of others, and then there's the safety with others. And sometimes they compete. So when you walked in, I get the feeling that you walked in with hope, but with trepidation. What was the early stages of suddenly sitting in a room with everybody? Because I'm sure there's both therapists listening who deal with this and want to deal with this, and also people that they work with. What's it like to walk in there? What was it like for you?
Yeah, I remember it so well. And then also as a therapist who runs groups, I deal with it with a lot of my clients that have resistance to the idea of going to group at all for a while because the fear is so strong. For me, I remember being in the waiting room, and the way that this therapist had run groups, and I do the same, which is it's not a cohort group. It does not start and end with the same group, start to finish. People can stay various lengths of time depending on what their needs are and, how long group continues to be helpful for them. And so there are new people who join already existing connections that have been made. And so going into that group, I remember waiting in the waiting room, and everybody that was also waiting in the waiting room seemed to know each other and to sort of speak in shorthand because they just catching up. They kind of starting in the middle of every sentence. So I felt probably shy on a good day, but in that situation, I just remember feeling really uncomfortable, pretty invisible, because I think they knew each other. It was, a private space in a therapy waiting room. So I think people tend to be a little bit too like respectful of somebody's privacy in a space like that. And going into the room, and the first group session, my therapist did not introduce me to the others, which I was shocked about. I thought for sure she would. So I kept waiting for her too, and she didn't. I always introduce people when they come into my group. I don't know whether that was intentional or what. I don't think I ever actually asked her why she didn't, but my guess was she wanted me to help, or she wanted to help me develop my own voice. How do I introduce myself? How do I speak up? And in the end, she just asked me why I was being so quiet towards the end of group. So it was like an in for me, but it was very awkward and very uncomfortable. And the others in the group didn't seem to actually notice me until that point where I introduced myself. So yeah, so that was all just very interesting. But once I did, they were much warmer and friendlier. So
Yeah. So you said that you make sure that you do introduce clients to the group, and that. So what other things do you do as a therapist to sort of soften that initial, first shock of, being in a group of strangers?
Yeah, I structure my groups and I really ask everybody to come in. I'll give all my group members a topic a week prior to group. So my groups I run every other week. And then the week prior to group, I'll send out a topic to everybody. So they have a week to really think about it. And they're always related to, being human. Things like how's your energy levels, what depletes you, what replenishes you, that kind of thing. So that's an example of a question. Or we may talk about limiting beliefs. What are some limiting beliefs that you notice were in play during this week? Something like that. And so then each person has a turn to share. But the most important part that I think in the groups that I run is I have them, after the initial sharing, connect again through what's resonating for each of them, so that there's that connection that gets very explicitly discussed. I mean, what is coming up for you? What is resonating for each person? And then also, if there is anything that's triggering, I ask people to share that as well. And so there's different layers that we get into, but I structure it more than that group that I started in. And I don't know
Yes.
whether that, yeah.
Well,
Yeah, yeah.
no, I think each group, and this is what's important, is that I've, from what we've talked about with other group therapists, and there are some pretty famous bods in America who've been developing this over the decades, but that it's very much an expression of personality. And it's some sort of, I've seen them, they like a very clinical space. And that's interesting. I found that odd, but that was, they found a group that required that type of, they drew a group that required that. So there's a degree to which I would imagine if somebody didn't like your approach, then they'd probably leave and move on. So it's that your I like the way that you have not sort of like you come to the group and you stay for 6 months. You come to group and you stay for as long as the group is helpful and functional and developmental for you. And I imagine sometimes the group discussion goes off in very unexpected directions. How do you work with that type of unexpected stuff?
I feel like there's always overlap. It's always understandable how we got here. So if it starts to go off on sort of a path that we weren't expected, I might just state that, like, wow, we're going down this path. It seems a little surprising because we started here. What's that about? And ask everybody to sort of say a little bit more about what their understanding is. Why are we going towards this thing? What is it? Because if there is something that is, sometimes it's clear that something's bringing up a lot for people, and we will look at that and say, what's about this topic? Why is this topic feeling so potent for everybody? What's getting touched on for all of you? And really kind of go there if it feels productive. I mean, sometimes we can go off on a tangent and it's maybe not the most productive. It might be, sometimes people can get caught up in maybe more small talk kind of stuff where they're connecting and sharing stories that are interesting, but perhaps not part of the growth process. And so if that's the case, then I may also say, I feel like we're getting off track here, and sometimes that happens if there's a topic that's really uncomfortable. And so if it seems like that might be the reason why people are sort of kind of going off on this other tangent, we may speak to that and say, this is a tough topic, and see what people have to say about that.
That's brilliant. There's about 3 or 4 really fabulous takeaways there. Yeah, you're thinking, Matt.
I was just going to say, just before we get into some of the detail on transformational shift and that happens within the group, I've got another technical question, and that is just how hands-on are you in the group? Because I've been in groups where it's very hands-on for the therapist, and I've been in other groups where the therapist basically sits back and just lets the dynamic of the group unfold. So, what is it
Mm.
like for you?
I'm pretty hands-on. I will sort of guide people through the structure. I love when they respond to each other more than me responding. So I always want to have space for that. And if that's happening, I push myself to hold back a little. I think my tendency is maybe to jump in more than what's always helpful. So I'm mindful of that. And I will be deliberate about like breathing through it if I feel like stuff's happening without me. I love that. But I definitely am very involved in just helping to move sort of the group around and make sure that we're staying on topics that feel like it's addressing the growth needs of the members in the group because they're coming in for a reason. And we end up loving each other. I mean, I think that's part of it is the relationships that get developed are so warm and people are so connected. And so there could be a tendency to get into some lighter stuff, which is fine. I mean, I don't think it has to be heavy, the entire time. But if it feels like we're sort of getting off track in that way, like I said earlier, then I will be deliberate about bringing us back.
Okay,
It's
and then
just a
bringing
gentle,
them back.
sorry, I
Sorry.
was just saying gentle sensitivity. That's all, Matt.
Right.
It just feels really nice. Sorry, back
Yeah.
to you.
Yeah. So in bringing them back, what is the end goal that you always have in mind? What are you bringing them back to, and what's the goal at the end of the day?
I think one of the reasons why I think group is so powerful is because we touch some of that inside stuff that's unconscious that we can't really touch when we're in individual sessions because we're not necessarily getting this extra information that's coming in that we get from other people. And so I always want people to get, if possible, new insights and to be able also to know that they're not alone, to
Mhm.
connect about some of these sort of difficult, vulnerable journeys. And so it's really those things where people can talk about some of the scary steps that they either want to take or are taking towards some change in their lives and help them learn from what other people have done, but also hear that they're not alone. And as we get to know each other, we get very much celebrated by each other. And that I think is just so lovely too, to be able to witness somebody sharing something that maybe they even think is such a little thing, but what they get reflected back to them from the others in the group is like, that's amazing. You've done this thing. Do you remember about how much you struggled with that? Look at what you've done. That kind of really to call out some of the movement that we see in each other because it's sometimes harder to see it in ourselves.
What about the gender balance? I noticed that there's a fabulous video you have on your website, which gives a
Mhm.
beautiful insight into the work you do. And if I remember, I think it was pretty much all women.
It's all women.
It's pretty much it. So do you maintain an all women thing by any reason or other? That's just the way it emerges, or what's your thinking about that gender balance?
Yeah, I am doing a little bit of both right now in terms of one of sort of my beginning direction was all women. I had brought a few men in here and there, but my practice was more women than men, so it was really difficult for me to bring in an even number of men. So often if I had a man join, he'd be the only man, and then for a bit, I would want to grow from there, but then it didn't do great in my sort of when I was trying to build some of those groups. I had done some more even men women groups years ago. And actually, I just started a brand new little group I started with just two people because they were really eager to get started. And it's a man and a woman. And, and also with gender, sort of leaving the binary and sort of just more gender options to nowadays. I really do like the idea of opening up more to having more of a mix of genders. But in one situation, I am sort of starting that. So.
Yeah, and I guess the statistics are against you because there's way more women that are coming to therapy in general, and so I guess sometimes you'd be hard pressed, having the number of males.
Yeah, you don't want to make it an equal opportunity aspect, because all therapy is very much generated by the intention of the person participating. So it's interesting where they come along. I mean, goodness gracious me, I've been an actor and a therapist, and the males have always been in the minority there, which is, except when it gets to teaching, which is quite interesting. We tend to look up there on the presentation stage, and it's a whole bunch of white guys, and sometimes I look around and go, wow, look at all these old white guys. I'm like, oh damn, so am I. But this essence of just allowing the group to be what it is, and that what I call comfortable, which comfortable is I talk about this as having a sense of strength by being able to relax and being calm. As I say, the safety with others, that's terribly important. And I just want to sort of circle back a little bit on this thing of new people coming in. You had that experience. And I'm just wondering, because you've just been giving such fabulous takeaways. I hope everyone's out there taking notes. This allowance of the new people coming in there'd be people who are very shy. There are people who are feeling uncomfortable. This requires a lot of sensitivity on your behalf, I would imagine. Do you find that onerous? Do you find that testing? Do you find that delightful that you're given that opportunity? I'm just wondering.
I mean, I kind of love it. And I think that's part of the reason why I really like a combination of group and individual, because if somebody's coming in, they're feeling shy, I'll coach them a bit before they, are really committed to taking that leap. Because I think if somebody is shy, they are very likely to be one of the people that's resistant. And so it will be a conversation, or many conversations. I'll start to let them know how I think group could support them on this journey as I'm working towards helping them understand it could be really helpful for them. And then once they start, I think, you were talking about just the safe space and how important. I think that that's such a priority of mine, to create a safe space, and that I think I do a good job with it. I mean, I think people feel pretty safe early on because of how the culture sort of gets developed in the groups. I think people are pretty open and vulnerable. So the ones that have been in group longer can sort of set the tone for newer people. And I always ask them to start, and then we will let the newer person share after they've had a chance to hear what others have to say. And so I think from their openness, they're able to feel, a little bit of support and safety as they go. So there was something else I was going to say about that. And just about the individual part. And then if somebody's feeling uncomfortable, then when we have a chance to talk individually, we can talk about, well, what did come up? What do you think about that? And I can help them decide. You don't have to share everything in group, and that they can decide what they want to get support with in group and what they want to hold private and save for individual sessions as well.
Yeah, another great takeaway. Yeah.
That's the power with working both in group and the individual one-on-one.
Yeah.
Now, Tanya, before we started recording, we were talking about energetic clutter. Can we just segue to that and just have a little bit of chat about what you're discovering there and how that fits into your therapy.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
fabulous term. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's actually something that came to me when I was actually clearing through my spice cabinets in my kitchen and realizing, yeah, energetically, we hold on to stuff that's taking up a lot of space and energy, like limiting beliefs. I know we were talking earlier about some limiting beliefs, and I mentioned that that was one that brought me into therapy to begin with. And but there's so many of them. And we all have our own nuanced versions. And these are usually things that got developed, these beliefs got developed in our childhoods, and we have associated behaviors with them. And I know you guys know this, and many of your listeners know this. I use the language energetic clutter to help my clients understand what's going on when they hold on to these limiting beliefs and these behavioral patterns that go along with them that got developed in childhood, but that are no longer serving them. And so, if they even ever were serving them, but I know that they get developed for reasons. And so, help people to understand that they're holding on to these ideas like productivity is the top way to spend our time, and that other ways to spend our time can't happen until we're done being productive, or the hustle for self-worth. Those ideas, um, they get so depleting when we're holding on to all of these ideas, because they impact how we live our day-to-day lives. So if we're somebody who believes we have to hustle for our work, then we're not prioritizing rest. We're not done until late at night and things like that. So I help people really start to understand what's their version of energetic clutter. And just to give you a very simple definition, the quickest, simplest definition that I've been saying is, it is all the things we hold on to energetically, our time, our energy, and our focus, that are not helping us move the needle towards growth or meaning or how we want to feel. And so there's definitely stuff that we give energy to, but when we choose it, then it's different than when we're just in this automatic pilot towards these limiting beliefs.
Yeah, it's interesting. I learned a lot, and I've changed the way I speak about things in relation to other people from disabled. Did a lot of work with disabled community, and I so much enjoyed my friend who introduced himself as Terry the Crip, Terry the Cripple, and he said, "I'm not disabled, mate. I'm absolutely 100% able. I can't walk, but that's your opinion. That's your opinion." And I do remember one time I was at the bottom of a set of stairs, and I was terribly uncomfortable because I was thinking of all the things that were wrong with Terry, and he just turned to me and said, "What are you, an idiot? Pick me up." So he knew he felt perfectly able, and he felt perfectly comfortable to be picked up, wasn't limited by the embarrassment. I was the one who was casting these negativities. And of course, there are plenty of people who are disabled who say, "Oh, I am lesser because I can't walk." And I tell them about Terry. It's a very interesting thing how we disable ourselves. We reduce our abilities by these beliefs that come into us from outside. From outside ourselves, from, as you say, but they come in from childhood traumas, they come in from bullying at school, they come in, I mean, we've talked about a thing called stereotype threat, just the general attitudes of society and so on and so forth, and getting around those and back into that sense of security and comfort about being yourself that you're talking about isn't something that we should be doing on our own. We should be doing it with other people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that doing a combination of being able to get some support, we can't really even trust ourselves sometimes in our ability to really catch ourselves sometimes because they're so entrenched. Some of these patterns are so entrenched. We don't always know when we're doing them, even because they're just so automatic. So it's really helpful, I think, to get feedback and to be able to touch like against our blind spots, get either somebody else responding or noticing something coming up for ourselves. I mentioned earlier about sort of the limiting belief, maybe I wasn't lovable, but also going into very people-pleasing tendencies and needing to be very mindful of that. And I continue to be. I mean, that's still something that I have a tendency to go towards wanting to do people-pleasy things. And I need to pay attention. When am I, and this is what I think is true for all of us to pay attention. When am I pleasing others, accommodating others at my own expense, and getting better at catching that has been such an important part of my own process, but that's what I work on with other people as well.
Yeah, yeah. I've got another technical question. I'm I'm really keen to sit in on one of your sessions.
Yeah.
But you're obviously, by now very attuned to, looking out for this energetic, clutter aspect in clients. So in a group setting,
Mhm.
are you calling this out as you sort of pick it up with individuals in the group, or which I would imagine would have to be done with some sensitivity? How do you work? How do you work to sort of bring that into the light?
Yeah. And
You
do
mean,
others call it out
Yeah,
amongst
yeah.
the group?
Yeah, you mean with each other or just in general? Yeah,
yeah.
In the
both.
group, yeah, with each
In the
other,
group.
you to them, yeah.
Yeah,
How does,
yeah.
yeah, how does it when it becomes obvious, and in that one you're saying where they don't know they're saying it, they're saying something,
Mhm.
uh, how does it tend to come out in the group that, like, hey, Betty, did you hear what you just said?
Yeah,
I'm wondering.
yeah,
Great
yeah.
question, man.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if it's not so obvious, I might put it out as a question and say, I hear that. I said, I'm also wondering if that might be something. And usually we've been talking about some of these patterns already. So it's not like they're brand new, but I suppose at some point it's the first conversation we're having about it. So it could be something like, how does your energy feel when you do that? And getting them to sort of participating and starting to identify, oh, yeah, I'm spending. So, for example, I'm just thinking of a client of mine who is so frustrated with herself because she is very creative and wants to really honor that creative part of herself, but catches herself sort of really getting stuck in procrastination and not moving forward in the way that she wants to. And we were just talking about reframing some of that and checking in with her about that and trying to help her see how harsh her inner critic is, and that that's taking a lot of energy. And so that's part of, just checking in. How does your energy feel when you do that, or starting to identify it? And um I mean, I think I always try to be gentle and direct, both, and find
Mm,
sort of that sweet spot of being able to be as direct as possible while also still being gentle. So, a combination of identifying, asking some questions, or sometimes I might say, oh, do you hear that? That sounds like what we were talking about earlier with so and so. And so, to help people start to make some of the connections and to have very explicit conversations about those nuances.
Yeah, yeah. And having an attitude of curiosity is what I hear sort of coming
mm.
out there.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
and there's this fabulous thing with the group where I know as an individual therapist myself, and I'm talking to people, and I bring in examples, and I bring in stories, and I bring in sort of things to help the client do all those things you talk about, not feel alone, not feel as though their problem is unmanageable. But it seems so much more empowering on an individual level, because they can see this happening around them in real time, in other people. And I think that, again, another beautiful takeaway: use the activities of the group to help the group find individual release and expansion. So that's another empowering aspect of group work, as long as you're sensitive and curious, as Matt says. And yeah, so there's a lot of balls to juggle, but I don't think I'm getting from you, it's not a cognitive juggling. It's just you get juggling, and then the juggling kind of organizes itself through having these qualities.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I think I'm just thinking too, with all of this, because I have my own history in group, and that's what led to me even becoming a therapist. I'm very open about that. And I will share with people my own experiences with some of the very same things that they're talking about. And so I think that gives a nice layer to some of what we're doing, because they know that I really get it inside and out from both perspectives. But yes, I mean, I think all of this has an organic flow to it, and there's a real I think that the culture of the group also gets developed as the relationships get stronger, and so there's more humor, there's maybe more acceptance of some of this feedback as well, when we might be giving people feedback.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Tanya, we're coming to the end of our talk here. I'm just wondering, is there anything that we've missed, or maybe something to sort of round out the conversation?
The only thing that I was thinking of earlier is that another part that's really helpful in terms of doing both individual and group together is this shared experience that I get to have with my clients, that typically as a therapist, you hear about their social activities, but you don't get to see them in action. And so being able to see my clients in these group contexts where they have these social experiences is so helpful for our work together, because I can speak to it from that place rather than just hearing what they're reporting to me. So.
Yeah, that's another empowerment for the therapist. So for those people, sort of working with groups, but particularly for those of our listeners who are contemplating what are the benefits of groups, this has been an interesting idea. This has been just the most wonderful insight and engagement with the possibilities and the positive frameworks and some just straight out technical advice. I want to thank you so much for coming in and sharing that with us. We could talk forever, but we know that this is kind of like the concentration span of things. But we want people, and we'll have links to your website where they can go and watch that fabulous video. Amongst look at all there's lovely stuff. You reveal your story. You talk about a lot of very open, very engaging website. Go there. Is there anything coming up or anything else that you would like us to know about before you leave, or just come in and see what you're doing on your website and go from there?
I'm not sure when this is gonna get go
Soon.
live. We're doing okay.
Pretty soon.
The only thing to say is I talk about the groups that I do in my practice, but I also do small retreats and the idea is to kind of the group experience on steroids, where we really go in and we really go deep. At the moment I do them with another woman, another wonderful therapist. And we call them the deep reset retreat, because it really helps people sort of get a more like a deeper reset.
We get lost.
Yeah.
In all this confusing, confabulable, weird thing that we call the world we live in. Great retreats. Well, I'm so glad you brought that up, and we included that. So everybody go look out for those. You can go in your hometown, you can go on personal things, and you can go off and just let it all hang out in a beautifully protected space. How wonderful. So for now, Tanya, we must say goodbye, but we thank you really from the bottom of our hearts.
And thank you both so much. I really enjoyed talking to you, but I also love the fact that you both also are coming at your own work from such a human place. And that always makes me really happy.
Thank you so much, Tanya.
Yeah, thank you.